Hey, what's up? Tim Warner here. I just got a wild idea today. I was doing my computer-based training instruction like I normally do every workday, and it occurred to me, Tim, instead of hassling yourself about you need to update your YouTube, you need to do something, I thought instead of putting all of that cognitive load on myself, why don't I just flip on my screen recorder like I do every day, but this time flip on the webcam and just talk. Let's do some IT straight talk. And the first subject that I want to discuss with you is imposter syndrome. And I want to talk a little bit about how I've come to accept who and what I am, professionally speaking. This is important. I'm using for my definitions and references ChatGPT, just to get that out of the way. So according to ChatGPT, imposter syndrome is a psychological pattern in which individuals doubt their skills, talents, or accomplishments and have a persistent internalized fear of being exposed as a fraud, quote unquote. Now, check this out. Despite external evidence of their competence, those experiencing this syndrome remain convinced that they're frauds and do not deserve the success they've achieved. It's not a helpful way to be, is it? And I especially like the despite external evidence of their competence. And so what that dovetails in, I think of my own career. I've had my career going for a couple dozen years now. I can't believe how time has flown. And looking back on it, I had quite a journey. As a boy, looking back even as young as 10, 11, 12 years old, I was always into research. I was always into being a student. I was always into being a teacher, even though I didn't consider it teaching. For example, I have natural aptitude for the guitar. And of course, all the neighborhood kids, when they saw I could jam, wanted to do it too, right? So I wound up conducting workshops out of my bedroom. I wasn't charging anything. It was all for the fun of things. That was teaching. I played with computers since I was a boy. My dad was always a fairly technically competent guy. And I remember we had the Timex Sinclair T1000, the ZX Spectrum, I think is what it was called overseas in Europe. Commodore 64, the Radio Shack TRS-80, learning basic programming. So I've had these two passions, these two subjects that I had genuine competence in: technology, education, stuff that I loved, stuff that my grandpa used to say when I was a boy, Timmy, when you're trying to find a career, try to find work that you would do even if you weren't getting paid for it. Then you know you found the right career. And I knew that was sage wisdom, even though in some ways it went over my head by definition because I was a kid. But here I am, 53 years of age, and that is still sage wisdom. You know what I mean? So what happened was, when I got older and got out of high school and I was fortunate enough to go to university, I had it in my head that I wanted to be a doctor. And I do like science. I love biology, mathematics, chemistry, physics, you name it. But honestly, I never really had a big aptitude for it, and I don't think my interest in it is passionate enough to where I certainly wouldn't spend time at night before I go to sleep reading just for fun on medical science. And looking back on that after all these years, it makes sense. Nonetheless, I was crushed because I didn't get into med school. I'm grateful for that now, although it was crushing at the time, because I had prepared full-time for 4 full years in order to go to med school and become what I thought was my destiny. No, it wasn't. I didn't get into med school. I wound up staying at the university and earning a master's degree in education without even putting much thought into it. I was really, really depressed at that time. Now, that decision, let's just try education as an afterthought. Turns out that's my key competency professionally, And after I left graduate school, I wound up trying a little bit being a middle school science teacher. Again, it's not my aptitude. The science is not my bag. So again, very depressed, not sure where I'm going in my life. I wound up at a mom and pop computer store and just working, helping on the sales floor a little bit, doing bench repair. And a guy came in one day named Jim Boland. He's long since passed away now. He worked for a company called Executrain. I'm pretty sure Executrain is still around. And we were just shooting the bull one day. He brought in his personal computer for repair, and we're just chatting. And he looks at me and says, "You know, you sound like you'd be a good fit for what I do. Have you thought of training?" And I thought, honestly, no. I told him about the med school falling through and told him how I was ready to be a school teacher, even though it really didn't tickle my fancy. So he said, "Well, why don't you come over to Executrain and just see what's up? I teach people how to use Windows. I teach them how to use Microsoft Office applications." He wasn't a tech trainer as such. He was a desktop applications trainer, an end user trainer. And I went over there, and the rest is history, honestly. That was in 1997. I started teaching apps, but immediately wanted to go deeper, you see. So the lesson here, I've got some helpful quotes from ChatGPT. One from one of my favorite works of literature, Shakespeare's Hamlet, where Polonius, in a joke, in the actual play, he was kind of joking when he said it, but it's so wise. "To thine own self be true, and it must follow as the night the day, thou canst not then be false to any man." What are some other ones? Oh, there's a quote from George R.R. Martin from Game of Thrones. "Never forget what you are, for surely the world will not. Make it your strength, then it can never be your weakness. Armor yourself in it, and it will never be used to hurt you." Ooh, that is really hot stuff. So what I'm saying is, if you want to take my advice and do what I've done, inventory yourself honestly, but without beating yourself up in shame. That's why that imposter syndrome stuff is a bunch of BS. I mean, it's legit. I'm verifying and validating that it exists, but it's not worth investing mental energy in because a lot of times it deals with falsehood. Why do I say that? Well, of course, like just about anybody else on the planet, I went through quite a stretch of imposter syndrome. Because as I got more into tech, I have over the last 25 years spent time in industry, in bursts, doing systems administration work and that sort of stuff. But I found that I always came back to being happiest when I was teaching. For me, the imposter syndrome snuck in because of, and it still makes me cringe when I hear people say it, "Those who can't do, teach." Where does that quote come from? Maybe I'll ask ChatGPT right now. Where does this quote come from? "Those who can't do, teach." It's a really small-minded exhortation. Oh, it's attributed to George Bernard Shaw, the Irish playwright and critic. The phrase appears to be in his work Man and Superman, published in 1903. And the original quote says, "He who can does, he who cannot teaches." Now, of course, there is a truth to that, because certainly I've had teachers over the years who were incompetent, frankly. And see there, what I think it is, it's a failure of self-reflection. What I originally was saying a couple minutes ago, I'm sorry, this is totally unscripted. I hope that I'm making some semblance of sense right now. This is completely live without a net. And hopefully, when you're watching the final product on YouTube, you won't see a whole bunch of janky jump cuts, because I want this to be organic and natural. But what I'm saying is, inventory what you're genuinely passionate about. Whatever it is, without judgment. What am I genuinely interested in? And also, compare that, or those things, with your aptitude. And it might be a case where you need to test it out a little bit. In my full-time work at Pluralsight, I've worked with plenty of author candidates who thought, I might want to do computer-based training. Well, they go through an audition process. And I love that because it's a great opportunity for them to reflect within themselves. Am I able to do this? Do I have enough natural aptitude that I can build on? And you also get candid feedback from your editor at Pluralsight too, and that can be helpful to get objective third-party support. So once you're finding things that you're genuinely interested in, for me, IT, information technology, and teaching, learning, I have aptitude in both of those. Great. So that means that I'm geeking out on learning public speaking, I'm geeking out on instructional design, I'm geeking out on IT topics all the time. That's wonderful. The third piece is time. I think it was Malcolm Gladwell, who I'm not a fan of, full disclosure, said something like expertise happens when you invest 10,000 hours into it. I mean, it's kind of Mickey Mouse, whatever. But I mean, the kernel there, I think, is perfectly valid. That if I'm going to be a craftsperson, I need to hone my craft. I need to sharpen my saw, fill in whatever cliche you want to at that point. So those three things, there's interest, aptitude, and then time spent in that development. Now, to come back again to recurse to imposter syndrome, I would find myself earlier in my career feeling like I'm not really an IT professional and that people are going to think that I'm a fraud, that I just know some stuff in my head, but because I haven't been out in the industry as long as they are, I'm not good enough. Honestly, I felt the same way during the times that I've been in industry. I'd feel like I'm not quite good enough. And also there's that itch inside where I want to get back to instructional design and teaching. It took many years for me to even be aware of this stuff. So if you're not yet there, please don't beat yourself up. That would be a huge lesson that I have in this video. Be kind, gentle, and graceful with yourself. It makes a huge amount of difference. Because where I sit right now at this point in time on August 24th, 2023, is that I'm comfortable in my own skin. I know, and I've got verification, first and third party verification, that I'm an effective instructor and author. And I continue to hone my craft. And I no longer feel less than in any way. I don't care if I'm giving a presentation for 2 people or 2,000 people. I've reached a level of comfortability to where it's not only okay for me to express my ignorance, I think, and I often tell my 13-year-old daughter Zoe this, the most important thing I know, by far, is that I have the tiniest inkling of the vastness of what I don't know. that and grappling with that enormity of my ignorance compared to what I do know, that keeps me in pretty good stead. In terms of, falling into cognitive biases and arrogance, honestly, that can be a hobbling influence as well. Well, I don't want these little video snippets to go too long. I know that algorithmically there's all this garbage about the ideal YouTube video is 5 minutes, whatever. It is what it is. I want you to know that I appreciate you sticking all the way to the end. And I'm not even going to say any of that stuff like, hit that bell. As my mom says, a pearl of wisdom from Sherry Warner, what will be, will be. How can you get more on the point than that? So, hope this was useful for you. We'll see you at the next one. Later.